Chaco said that going to see The Sound of Music was an extended exercise in Anglophilia. Amu said, "Oh come on, the whole world goes to see The Sound of Music. It's a world hit." "Nevertheless, my dear," Chaco said in his reading aloud voice. Mamachi often said that Chaco was easily one of the cleverest men in India. According to whom, Amu would ask. On what basis? Mamachi loved to tell the story, Chaco's story, of how one of the dons at Oxford had said that in his opinion Chaco was brilliant and made of prime ministerial material. To this Amu always laughed and said, like people in the comics. She said, going to Oxford didn't necessarily make a person clever. Cleverness didn't necessarily make a good prime minister. If a person couldn't even run a pickle factory profitably, how was that person going to run a whole country? And most important of all Indian mothers are obsessed with their sons and are therefore poor judges of their abilities. Chaco replied, "You don't go to Oxford, you read at Oxford. And after reading at Oxford, you come down." "Do you mean down to earth?" Amu would ask. "That you definitely do, like your famous airplanes." Amu said that the sad, but entirely predictable fate of Chaco's airplanes was an impartial measure of his abilities. Once a month, except during the monsoons, a parcel would arrive for Chaco by VPP. It always contained a balsa aero modeling kit. It usually took Chaco between 8 and 10 days to assemble the aircraft with its tiny fuel tank and motorized propeller. When it was ready, he would rake Esther and Rahel to the rice fields in Natacom to help him fly it. It never flew for more than a minute. Month after month, Chaco's carefully constructed planes crashed in the slush-green paddy fields into which Esther and Rahel would spurt, like trained retrievers, to salvage the remains. A tail, a tank, a wing. A wounded machine. Chaco's room was cluttered with broken wooden planes. And every month, another kit would arrive. Chaco never blamed the crashes on the kit. It was only after Papacha died that Chaco resigned his job as lecturer at the Madras Christian College and came to Imenam with his Balliol ore and his pickle baron dreams. He commuted his pension and provident fund to buy a borrowed bottle sealing machine. His Balliol ore, with his teammates' names inscribed in gold, hung from iron hoops on the factory wall. Up to the time Chaco arrived, the factory had been a small but profitable enterprise. Mamachi just ran it like a large kitchen. Chaco had it registered as a partnership and informed Mamachi that she was the sleeping partner. He invested in equipment and expanded the labor force. Almost immediately, the financial slide began, but was artificially buoyed by extravagant bank loans that Chaco raised by mortgaging the family's rice fields around the Imenam house. Though Amu did as much work in the factory as Chaco, whenever he was dealing with food inspectors or sanitary engineers, he always referred to it as my factory, my pineapples, my pickles. Legally this was the case because Amu, as a daughter, had no claim to the property. Chaco told Rahel and Esther that Amu had no locust stand. Thanks to our wonderful male chauvinist society, Amu said. Chaco said, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is also mine. He had a surprisingly high laugh for a man of his size and fatness. And when he laughed, he shook all over without appearing to move. Until Chaco arrived in Imenam, Mamachi's factory had no name. Everybody just referred to her pickles and jams as Sosha's tender mango or Sosha's banana jam. Sosha was Mamachi's first name, Soshama. It was Chaco who christened the factory Paradise Pickles Preserves and had labels designed and printed at Comrade Pillai's press. At first, he had wanted to call it Zeus Pickles Amp Preserves, but that idea was vetoed because everybody said that Zeus was too obscure and had no local relevance, whereas Paradise did. It was Chaco's idea to have a billboard painted and installed on the Plymouth's roof rack. Now, on the way to Cochin, the billboard rattled and made falling off noises. Near Vicom, they had to stop and buy some rope to secure it more firmly. That delayed them by another 20 minutes. Rahel began to worry about being late for the Sound of Music. Then, as they approached the outskirts of Cochin, the red and white arm of the railway level crossing gate went down. Rahel knew that this had happened because she had been hoping that it wouldn't. She hadn't learned to control her hopes yet. Esther said that was a bad sign. So now, they were going to miss the beginning of the picture. When Julie Andrews starts off as a speck on the hill and gets bigger and bigger till she bursts onto the screen with her voice like cold water and her breath like peppermint. The red sign on the red and white arm of railway level crossing said, "Stop," in white. "Pots," Rahel read it in reverse. A yellow hoarding nearby said, "Be Indian," by Indian, in red. Which Esther read in reverse. The twins were precocious with their reading. They had raced through Old Dog Tom, Janet and John, and their Ronald Ridout workbooks. At night, Amu read to them from Kipling's Jungle Book. As she read, Amu could make her voice gravelly, like Shere Khan's, or whining, like Tabaki's. Baby Kachama, who had been put in charge of their formal education, had read them an abridged version of The Tempest by Charles and Mary Lamb. Where the bee sucks, there suck I, in a cowslip spell, I lie, Esther and Rahel would go about saying. So, when Baby Kachama's Australian missionary friend, Miss Mitten, gave Esther and Rahel a baby book, The Adventures of Susie Squirrel, as a present when she visited Imenem, they were deeply offended. First, they read it backwards. Miss Mitten, who belonged to a sect of born-again Christians, said that she was a little disappointed in them when they read it aloud to her, backwards. They showed Miss Mitten how it was possible to read both Malayalam and Madam, as I'm Adam, backwards, as well as forwards. She wasn't amused, and it turned out that she didn't even know what Malayalam was. They told her it was the language everyone spoke in Kerala. She said she had been under the impression that it was called Keralese. Esther, who had by then taken an active dislike to Miss Mitten, told her that, as far as he was concerned, it was a highly stupid impression. Miss Mitten complained to Baby Kachama about Esther's rudeness and about their reading backwards. She told Baby Kachama that she had seen Satan in their eyes. They were made to write imposition, "In future we will not read backwards, in future we will not read backwards," 100 times. A few months later, Miss Mitten was killed by a milk van in Hobart, across the road from a cricket oval. To the twins, there was hidden justice in the fact that the milk van had been reversing, while Miss Mitten never liked reversing. More buses and cars had stopped on either side of the level crossing. An ambulance that said Sacred Heart Hospital was full of a party of people on their way to a wedding. The bride was staring out of the back window, her face partially obscured by the flaking paint of the huge red cross. The buses all had girls' names. Lusakuti, Molakuti, Beena Mol. In Malayalam, Mol is little girl, and Mon is little boy. Beena Mol bus was full of pilgrims who'd had their heads shaved at Thirupan. Rahel could see a row of bald heads at the bus window above evenly spaced vomit streaks. She was more than a little curious about vomiting. She had never vomited, not once. Esther had, and when he did, his skin grew hot and shiny, and his eyes, helpless and beautiful, and Amu loved him more than usual. Chaco said that Esther and Rahel were indecently healthy, and so was Sophie Mole. He said it was because they didn't suffer from inbreeding, like most Syrian Christians. Mama Chi said that what her grandchildren suffered from was far worse than inbreeding. She meant having parents who were divorced. As though these were the only choices available to people, inbreeding or divorce. Rahel wasn't sure what she suffered from, but occasionally she practiced sad faces and sighing in the mirror. It is a far, far better thing that I do, than I have ever done, she would say to herself, sadly. That was Rahel, being Sidney Carton, being Charles Darnay, as he stood on the steps, waiting to be guillotined in the Classics Illustrated, comics version, of A Tale of Two Cities. She wondered what had caused the bald pilgrims to vomit so uniformly, and whether they had vomited together, in a single, well-orchestrated heave, or separately, one at a time. Initially, when the level crossing had just closed, the air was full of the impatient sound of idling engines. But when the man that manned the crossing came out of his booth on his backwards bending legs, and signaled, with his limp, flapping walk, to the tea stall, that they were in for a long wait, drivers switched off their engines, and milled about, stretching their legs. With a desultory nod of his bored and sleepy head, the level crossing divinity conjured up beggars with bandages, men with trays, selling pieces of fresh coconut, parapuvadas, on banana leaves, and cold drinks, Coca-Cola, Fanta, rose milk. A leper, with soiled bandages, begged at the car window. That looks like mercurochrome to me, Amu said, of the leper's inordinately bright blood. Congratulations, Chaco said. Spoken like a true bourgeoise, Amu smiled, and they shook hands, as though she really was being awarded a certificate of merit for being an honest-to-goodness, genuine bourgeoise. Moments like these, the twins treasured, and threaded like precious beads on a necklace. Rahel and Esther squashed their noses against the Plymouth's quarter windows. Yearning marshmallows, with cloudy children behind them. Amu said, no, firmly, and with conviction. Chaco lit a Charminar cigarette. He inhaled deeply and then removed a little flake of tobacco that had stayed behind on his tongue. Inside the Plymouth, it wasn't easy for Rahel to see Esther, because baby Kachama rose between them like a hill. Amu had insisted that they sit separately to prevent them from fighting. When they fought, Esther called Rahel a refugee stick insect. Rahel called him Elvis the pelvis, and did a twisty, funny kind of dance that infuriated Esther. When they had serious physical fights, they were so evenly matched that the fights went on forever, and things that came in their way, table lamps, ashtrays, and water jugs, were smashed or irreparably damaged. Baby Kachama was holding on to the back of the front seat with her arms. When the car moved, her arm fat swung like heavy washing in the wind. Now it hung down like a fleshy curtain blocking Esther from Rahel. On Esther's side of the road was a tea shack that sold tea and stale glucose biscuits in dim glass cases with flies. There was lemon soda in thick bottles with blue marble stoppers to keep the fizz in. And a red icebox that said, rather sadly, things go better with Coca-Cola. Murlid Haran, the level-crossing lunatic, perched, cross-legged, and perfectly balanced on the milestone. His balls and penis dangled down, pointing towards the sign, which said, Cochin, 23 kilometers. Murlid Haran was naked, except for the tall plastic bag that somebody had fitted onto his head, like a transparent chef's cap, through which the view of the landscape continued dimmed, chef-shaped, but uninterrupted. He couldn't remove his cap, even if he had wanted to, because he had no arms. They had been blown off in Singapore in 1942, within the first week of his running away from home to join the fighting ranks of the Indian National Army. After independence, he had himself registered as a Grade 1 freedom fighter and had been allotted a free, first-class railway pass for life. This too, he had lost, along with his mind, so he could no longer leave on trains or in refreshment rooms in railway stations. Murlid Haran had no home, no doors to lock, but he had his old keys tied carefully around his waist in a shining bunch. His mind was full of cupboards, cluttered with secret pleasures. An alarm clock, a red car with a musical horn, a red mug for the bathroom, a wife with a diamond, a briefcase with important papers, a coming home from the office, and crisp banana chips for the children. He watched the trains come and go. He counted his keys. He watched governments rise and fall. He counted his keys. He watched cloudy children at car windows with yearning marshmallow noses. The homeless, the helpless, the sick, the small and lost, all filed past his window. Still, he counted his keys. He was never sure which cupboard he might have to open, or when. He sat on the burning milestone with his matted hair and eyes like windows, and was glad to be able to look away, sometimes. To have his keys, to count and countercheck. Numbers would do, numbness would be fine. Murlidharan moved his mouth when he counted and made well-formed words. Esther noticed that the hair on his head was curly grey, the hair in his windy, armless armpits was wispy black, and the hair in his crotch was black and springy. One man with 3 kinds of hair. Esther wondered how that could be. He tried to think of whom to ask. The waiting filled Rahel until she was ready to burst. She looked at her watch. It was 10 to 2. She thought of Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer kissing each other sideways so that their noses didn't collide. She wondered whether people always kissed each other sideways. She tried to think of whom to ask. Then, from a distance, a hum approached the held-up traffic and covered it like a cloak. The drivers, who'd been stretching their legs, got back into their vehicles and slammed doors. The beggars and vendors disappeared. Within minutes, there was no one on the road, except Murlidharan, perched with his bum on the burning milestone, unperturbed, and only mildly curious.